My grandmother's restaurant was the center of my world for most of my childhood. Not large, never was. Tucked on a side street, the kind you only find if someone who already knows takes you there. Worn paint, an old hanging sign that never got replaced. Nothing about the exterior suggested anything worth stopping for. Inside, it was always full, every single day. Lines at lunch, tables with waiting lists, customers who drove in from neighboring towns just to eat there and drove back the same evening. Nobody could articulate exactly what drew them. They just kept returning. My name is Mary. I grew up in that kitchen. My earliest memories are of sitting on a stool, watching my grandmother cook. The heat, the constant clatter, the smell that stayed in my clothes for days after. She moved through that kitchen with the precision of someone who had built a system over decades and trusted nothing outside of it. Everything had its place, everything had its sequence, and she had rules she never fully explained. One of them involved the freezer at the back of the kitchen. It wasn't large, chest style, sat against the far wall beneath a shelf of dry goods. She kept it closed without exception, and she never opened it when anyone else was present. When I asked about it as a child, she would say it held special stock, things that needed particular conditions. I accepted that the way children accept anything, completely and without follow-up. When people asked my grandmother what made the food different, she would laugh and say it was simply the way they did things, nothing more specific than that. And the food was different. Everyone said so without being able to say how. Not the ingredients themselves, not the presentation, something underneath all of that. A quality that people noticed and couldn't name and kept coming back for without fully understanding why. I grew up, moved away, returned occasionally to help. The restaurant remained constant. My grandmother remained constant, working every day well into old age, refusing every suggestion to slow down or sell or close. Then she died, quickly and without much warning. A health decline, a short hospital stay, and then she was gone before any proper goodbye was possible. The restaurant passed to me. I hadn't planned to continue it, but I couldn't close it either. It was too embedded in everything I understood about my life. So I stayed. The first months were harder than I expected. Not operationally, I knew the process as well, but in trying to maintain whatever that quality was, the thing that made the food what it was. Somehow it held. Customers kept coming. The comments remained the same. It's exactly the same. It's like she never left. That should have comforted me more than it did. Because I knew I wasn't doing anything different. I was following her recipes precisely. Her sequences, her timings. Everything documented and followed without deviation. So why was it still the same? I started paying attention to details I'd previously moved past. The shopping lists she'd left, inventory records, supplier notes. Certain quantities didn't match the recipes they were supposedly for. Certain items appeared regularly with no obvious destination in the documented menus. Nothing that demanded immediate explanation, just small frictions that accumulated quietly. Then the restaurant closed for 2 days due to an electrical fault. I used the time for a full inventory clear-out, checking everything, discarding anything past its date, working methodically through the kitchen from front to back, until I reached the freezer. I stood in front of it for a moment, then pulled it open. At first it looked normal, packages stacked neatly, properly wrapped, each one labeled, but the labels only showed dates, no contents, no supplier, no description of any kind, just dates. I lifted one out, heavy, dense. The wrapping was thick and professionally sealed, more carefully than anything needed to be for ordinary stock. I carried it to the counter, opened it. The smell arrived before anything else. Strong, not rot exactly, something more concentrated than that. Raw, but not in any way I recognized from years of working around meat. The texture was wrong. The color was wrong. I stood there telling myself I was looking at an unfamiliar cut, some specialty item I hadn't encountered. something with a reasonable explanation. I opened another package, then another, all identical. Same careful wrapping, same absence of identification, same wrongness. I'm not going to describe the specifics, partly because I still can't organize it clearly without feeling like I'm losing something, partly because the details aren't what haunts me. What haunts me is the moment the denial became impossible, and what followed that moment immediately, a memory I hadn't visited in years. I was a child. A regular customer had asked my grandmother, half laughing, whether the food contained some secret forbidden ingredient. My grandmother smiled and said, "There are things better left unknown." At the time, it was just something adults said. Standing in that kitchen holding an unmarked package, it wasn't anymore. I started moving through everything I half remembered from those years. Vague things, peripheral things, people in the neighborhood who had disappeared without satisfying explanation. Always distant enough to feel unrelated, never close enough to force a connection. Coincidences stop feeling like coincidences when you look at them from a different position. I didn't call anyone. I know that's the part that requires explanation, but I couldn't make myself do it. Part of me kept reaching for an alternative explanation that would make everything make sense differently. Part of me couldn't bring myself to be the person who destroyed what remained of her. So I did the only thing I could manage. I emptied the freezer completely, cleaned it, removed everything with no identification from the entire kitchen, and continued. I adjusted recipes, substituted ingredients, rebuilt processes from the parts I could stand behind. And that's when I understood the full weight of what I'd found, because it didn't taste the same anymore, not immediately. It took weeks for customers to start noticing, careful comments at first. Something's slightly different. I can't place it, but something's changed. Then the visits became less frequent, then the lines shortened, then the tables started having gaps. I knew exactly what was missing. That's the part I can't resolve. Because sometimes now, standing alone in that kitchen trying to rebuild something I can be proud of, I catch myself thinking not about what I found in that freezer, but about how well it worked, for how long, without a single person ever suspecting. After years of eating there, including me. I've lived in this cottage for nearly 2 years. Small but not suffocating. Living room, kitchen, 1 bedroom, bathroom. Sits at the end of a gravel lane on the edge of a semi-rural neighborhood. My routine has always been predictable. Leave in the morning, return late afternoon, cook something simple, spend an hour on my phone, sleep. Unremarkable by every measure. But before sleep, always, without exception, I lock the front door. This matters. I don't just lock it. I turn the key, pull the handle, check again. Sometimes I cross the room twice just to verify. It isn't anxiety exactly, more like a habit so ingrained it became automatic. It was that habit that made me notice immediately when something changed. The first night was almost nothing. I woke without reason somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning. No nightmare, no sound that startled me. Just awake, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. I lay still and listened to the cottage settle. Then I heard it, a faint metallic sound, light, precise, a click. I told myself it was a pipe, the structure contracting in the cold, a neighbor's door somewhere down the lane. Then it came again, slower this time, more deliberate, the specific sound of something turning inside a lock mechanism. I didn't move, held my breath, listened. It continued for several seconds, careful, unhurried, then stopped completely. I waited another full minute before getting up. I crossed to the front door. The key was in the lock exactly where I'd left it. Handle secure, nothing disturbed. I stood there for a moment, decided it was nothing, and went back to bed. The second night, I I woke to it already happening. Clearer, more defined. The sound of something working a lock with deliberate patience, as though whatever was doing it was in no particular hurry, just careful not to make noise. I sat up. The sound stopped the instant I moved. Exactly then, not a second before or after, as though something on the other side had felt the shift. I went to the door, opened it. The lane outside was empty. No footsteps retreating, no gate swinging, no movement anywhere in the dark. Just silence and the smell of cold air. I locked the door again and stood with my back against it for a long time. It became nightly after that, always between 2 and 4 in the morning, always the same careful rotating sound, always stopping the moment I was fully conscious. I tried every rational explanation. Wrong cottage, someone confused about which door was theirs, a drunk neighbor, a stray animal interfering with the latch. None of it held, because it was every night. Same time, same patience, same immediate silence the moment I stirred, and nobody ever there when I opened the door. No retreating footsteps, no sound of anyone leaving, as though whatever it was simply ceased to exist the moment the door opened. I started running a test. Before sleep, I positioned the key precisely, specific angle, specific alignment, and photographed it on my phone. In the morning, I checked. The key had moved, slightly, almost imperceptibly, but moved. Something had engaged the lock mechanism from the outside. One night I decided not to react. I woke to the sound as usual and stayed completely still, controlled my breathing, made myself wait. The sound continued longer than it ever had before, more persistent, the mechanism turning slightly, retreating, trying again, methodical, as though working through a problem with patience rather than force. Then, for the first time, the door handle moved, just slightly, a small rotation of shadow across the wood grain, but enough. I was across the room in seconds, door open, empty lane, still air, nothing. But this time I stayed in the doorway longer, stared down the full length of the gravel path until my eyes adjusted completely. Nothing moved anywhere. After that, the pattern shifted. The sounds grew longer, more assured, less cautious, as though whatever had been testing the door had finished testing and moved on to something else. And then I noticed something that stopped me completely. I had never once heard it arrive. The cottage sits on a gravel lane. Footsteps are audible from 20 meters away. The gate at the end of the path creaks reliably without exception. I had never heard the gate, never heard gravel, never heard a single approaching footstep. Only the sound, already at the door, already working, as if it had never needed to travel there at all. Then came the night I woke before the sound started. I don't know what pulled me out of sleep. Nothing I could identify. I lay in the dark listening. One footstep in the lane outside, then another. Slow, deliberate, getting closer across the gravel. They stopped directly outside the front door. Then the sound began, harder than it had ever been. The lock mechanism engaging under real pressure, turning, releasing, trying again, the handle straining slightly against the frame. I stood up but couldn't make myself cross the room. I stood in the center of the bedroom, completely still, listening to something try to get inside. It continued for a long time, then stopped. A different silence followed, heavier, the kind that has weight behind it rather than absence. I didn't open the door that night. In the morning, I made myself check the key position against the photograph on my phone. It had rotated further than any previous night, as though something had finally found enough leverage to move it properly from the outside. The nights since have been different. The lock mechanism is less frequent now. Instead, I hear something else. Slow, distributed pressure against the door. The specific sound of weight leaning against wood. resting there, staying for long stretches of time, just present. Last night was the first time I heard anything else. After the pressure against the door, after the silence that followed, something close to the wood, mouth almost against the grain, not quite a voice, but words, repeated more than once so I couldn't mistake them. I know you're there. We didn't buy the house for any particular reason, other than it felt right. Older neighborhood, well-maintained, the kind of street where the same families have lived for decades, and everybody knows which houses have history. The structure had been renovated in pieces over the years, but the bones were original. Thick walls, narrow door frames, floors that remembered every previous owner. The backyard sold us completely. Perfect space for Nico to run, and he adapted the way young children do. Within days, it already felt like he'd never lived anywhere else. The first few months were entirely unremarkable. Work, school, dinner, weekends. Nothing presented itself as wrong. If something was already in that house when we arrived, it gave us no reason to suspect it. Then, Nico started mentioning her. I was putting him to bed one evening when he looked toward the bedroom door, slightly ajar, and asked with complete casualness, "Is she sleeping here tonight too?" I assumed he was playing. I asked who he meant. He shrugged. "Her. She walks around at night." I told him there was nobody there, just us, the standard reassurance. He didn't argue, didn't seem concerned. That was what made it feel so normal. But it continued, always the same tone, casual, observational, like commenting on the weather. She was in the kitchen this morning. She stood in the hallway for a long time. Connie and I told ourselves it was an imaginary friend. Children Nico's age construct those. We didn't encourage it, but we didn't challenge it either. We let it sit. Then, one Sunday afternoon, Nico was drawing at the living room table. I sat beside him to look. Typical child's drawing. House, tree, sky, but in the upper corner of the paper there was a figure, tall, positioned slightly apart from everything else. I asked who it was. He didn't look up. "Her." I kept my voice light, asked if she had a name. He stopped drawing. First time I'd seen him pause like that over anything related to her. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "She does." I asked what it was. He shook his head slowly. "She doesn't want me to say it." I tried to rationalize it. Something from school, a story he'd heard somewhere. But Connie was becoming unsettled, mainly because Nico had started issuing instructions. Don't look at the hallway door after dark. Don't stay in rooms with no light. Always the same reasoning attached. She doesn't like it. We pressed him gently, asked what she looked like, what she did, where she went. The answers were vague or simply not given. Then came the morning he ran into our room, not sleepy, not confused, terrified. He came through the door at full speed and threw himself onto the bed against Connie, shaking. I'd never seen him cry like that. It wasn't a child's frustration or a bad dream. It was panic with nowhere to put itself. I asked what happened. He took a long time to speak. When he did, it came out quietly. "She talked to me." The room felt different after he said that. I asked what she said. Another long pause. "She said she's going to hurt you." From that point, it changed. Nico stopped playing alone in his room, stopped wanting the light off at any point. He began watching specific places, corners, door frames, the stretch of hallway visible from the kitchen, always quickly, always looking away before he'd fully looked. The things he described became more specific. "She goes on the ceiling sometimes. She stands near you when you're sleeping. She doesn't like Mom." One evening, he came and stood beside me while I watched television and said quietly, "She's here right now." I felt something move through my chest that I couldn't name. I asked where. He said, "Don't look." It was Connie who decided we needed to move forward rather than keep circling it. She suggested we ask Nico to get the name. Calmly, no pressure, just ask. I didn't like the idea, but we had nothing else. We sat with him one evening and explained gently that knowing would help us understand, that it was safe to tell us. He resisted at first, visibly uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with childhood reluctance. Eventually, he agreed, said he would ask her. I didn't sleep well that night, kept surfacing from shallow sleep, listening to the house. Nothing I could identify. The next morning, Nico was quiet at breakfast, looking down at the table. Connie and I waited. I asked if he had asked her. He nodded. Silence. I asked for the name. He said it without any weight behind it, casually, the way you'd say a word you'd known your whole life. A woman's name. Ordinary. Simple. Completely unremarkable. I'm not writing it here, but neither Connie nor I recognized it. It meant nothing to us in that moment. I went to speak to the neighbor the following day, the elderly woman next door who'd lived on that street longer than anyone else. I mentioned the name without explanation, just said I'd come across it and was curious if it meant anything locally. Her expression shifted immediately. She asked where I'd heard it. I said my son had mentioned it. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That woman lived in your house." I asked her to tell me more. She explained carefully. A woman who had lived there alone for many years before the previous family moved in. Kept entirely to herself, rarely seen outside. Known on the street mainly for her absence rather than her presence. She died inside the house. The neighbor paused before the last part, then said it plainly. Nobody knew for several days. I walked back home and stood in the hallway for a moment before going inside, because what had settled over me wasn't just the history of the name. It was something Nico had never once said across all those months. He had never said she appeared. He always spoke about her the same way, as if she had simply always been there, waiting for us to notice. Stay safe, guys.